if you can share, how did you go about in deciding, like Madrona and you deciding to invest? How did you evaluate and what made the decision to invest in the business? Right, it was early on, so it fits your framework as you were describing, early and mid stage, etc.
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say, like, that first of all, there is a certain amount of luck as well involved. So I don't want us to forget about that. But you put that aside, and I would say, like, there are probably like 3 or 4 things that I can think of that gave us, like, a very high level of conviction that we wanted to invest in Snowflake, when we decided to invest in Snowflake. And let me walk you through those things. Okay. As I mentioned before, Kima, I always think about the team. Okay. So for me, first and foremost, like, Bob Muglia was the CEO of Snowflake when we invested. And I had known Bob when he was at Microsoft. I've had the chance to work with Bob. And I felt really good about, like, Bob as a leader, particularly, like, this is the interesting anecdote. Back in the early 90s when Bob joined, or late 80s / early 90s when Bob was at Microsoft, the early days of Microsoft, Bob ended up being the first product manager for SQL Server.
Oh, wow.
So his engagement with data or involvement with data goes back, like, 3 decades or so now. Okay. Yeah. So having Bob at the helm of Snowflake, that was one reason why we thought, hey, there is something interesting here, kind of thing. The second thing is, remember, go back, this is now, like, 4 years ago or 5 years ago, kind of thing. As much as today we think, like, hey, cloud is absolutely here, everybody is okay with putting data in the cloud. When the Snowflake guys started with Snowflake, it wasn't obvious at all that, like, hey, everybody is going to put their data into the cloud. In fact, like, pretty much most everybody would tell you, like, hey, others may put their data in the cloud, but my data is special. My data, I need to think about regulations. I need to think about compliance. I need to think about this. I need to think about data sovereignty. So I'm going to have control of my data, kind of thing, right? But here comes a company that says, like, hey, I'm going to take a bet that sooner or later everybody is going to put their data in the cloud. And I'm going to think about, like, all the things that enterprises care about, like, thing I talked about: privacy, security, scale, data sovereignty, right? Global access to data. I'm going to think about all these things, and I'm going to build a platform that enables you to do that, kind of thing. Okay. That I thought was a bold bet when the rest of the world was still thinking about, like, hey, is it going to be hybrid? Is it going to be this? How much are you going to go to the cloud, kind of thing? The other innovation that Snowflake did earlier on was this notion of, like, splitting compute and storage separately. Okay, that I thought was a wonderful piece of innovation that, like, now everybody talks about it and everybody, oh my God, yeah, that's so natural, kind of thing. But Snowflake was the one who sort of said, like, hey, there is an opportunity here for us to add real value by being able to think about these two separately and sort of letting customers, take advantage of that. Okay, that I thought was great. So to me, like, hey, some of the product bets and the product innovation that the company has done was great. The third piece is, like, because we are in Seattle, we know a lot of people at Microsoft, we know a lot of people at Amazon, kind of thing. It was very interesting because we would talk to, like, these large cloud providers. And remember, all these guys have got, like, what I call competing offerings in the market against Snowflake. And even back then, some of them had, and we knew that everybody was going to get there, right? We would talk to the product group guys in these companies, and they would say, like, oh my God, Snowflake is amazing. Snowflake is fantastic, kind of thing. Okay. But they would say, like, hey, but know that we have a competing product and we have the platform, the underlying cloud infrastructure platform. So we are going to be competing and we are going to win this space, right? That was the tone of the conversation that you had with the product group guys. You go to the sales guys in these companies, they'll tell you, oh my God, I'm really worried about Snowflake. Okay. I'm starting to see more and more Snowflake in every customer conversation, kind of thing, right? So even though it was still early days for the company, remember when we invested in Snowflake, right? That was the year that Snowflake was going from a $3 million revenue run rate to about a $15 million revenue run rate. So we were in the middle of that. So it was still very early days. Yeah. But just hearing, like, the tone of the feedback from these large cloud providers was a sign. Okay, was a positive sign for us. And the fourth thing was the following. When we talked to Bob back then, it was interesting that Bob said, like, hey, I'm sort of seeing a pattern emerging. Okay. And this was back then. Okay. I'm seeing customers coming up and saying, like, hey, I love what you're saying about Snowflake. Let me sign up for Snowflake and let me start using it. Okay. And let me start with, like, hey, maybe a 10K, maybe a 20K commitment to Snowflake. So not a big commitment, but something small, right? Yeah. But then what happens is, like, I start seeing customers, start with that. They play around with it. They like it. They put more data. And in about 6 quarters, they go from 20K to about 175 to 200K of commitment to Snowflake. And I'm just seeing this pattern repeat again and again and again, even for the early stage that we are in.
Yeah.
So we looked at all these and said, like, hey, there is something, and I'll be the first to tell you, did I think, Snowflake was going to be a $70 billion valuation company within a year of like going IPO? No, I can tell you, if I told you that I knew that, I'm lying. Okay. But I knew that there was something special happening here, that there is a potential for a large, success here. And so we decided to invest in Bob and Snowflake back then.